Hi folks, this is Ela, and I'm going to talk about the difference between textured paper and smooth paper. So this is rough press. There's also cold press, which is also textured, but this is the most textured. So it's going to show you the most dramatic effects that come with texture. This is very smooth. This is hot press. They use a hot roller to kind of like iron the paper smooth. And so I'm going to open these up. And initially they look the same, but you can, if you look at it in the light, there is a texture there. You can hear it. It sounds like sandpaper when I touch it. So much smoother than this, right? Cold press is also textured. Some brands are smoother, especially the less expensive ones. But we're just going to do this with the same brand, Arches, which is my favorite. And I'm going to show you how they differ. So if it's textured, that means that if I draw on it, it's kind of like you can really see that texture with my crayon here. Whereas if I draw onto a smooth paper, you're getting much less texture. You can really see a sharp line if I want it. And this is watercolor paper, but if you want to draw, you're going to get a much cleaner, sharper line with the smooth paper than the textured one. I can even write, this is rough. Really shows it. This is hot. So if you like a graphic picture, something with sharp, defined lines with good control, this is going to do a much better job. Whereas it's just bumpier. It's harder to draw a line, and my pen is going to wear out much more quickly on the rough paper. You can see this pen works just fine on the hot, but it's beginning to wear out just with that little bit of drawing on the rough, how it's kind of bumping up and down. So this is a good painting medium, not such a great drawing medium. Now we can paint on both of these. I find that hot paper tends to do really well with staining colors, colors that have very, very tiny particles. So the paint is very smooth and even. You can't see the particles of paint on there. It's less great for wet into wet technique. Clearly you can do wet into wet technique, but it's like I don't use as much paint when I'm working on this because there's no place for that paint to go. There's no texture to hold that paint in place. It just sits on the surface. Whereas if I use wet into wet technique on the rough paper, that rough paper has all that texture. It holds on to the paint. So you can end up with much darker colors. Those little pockets in the paper can hold a lot of pigment. And I can end up with richer, deeper colors. And those pigments don't tend to run around nearly as far. And this is doubly true if I use a granulating paint. So these are staining colors that I have here. You can see how this top one dried out really quickly because it was really flat. It couldn't hold a lot of paint, so it dries quickly, and then we're getting a back run here, even though I worked really fast. This, I'm much less likely to get a back run. I can apply it and it stays put and it stays wet longer, so I can just keep playing wet into wet technique on the rough press. So granulating colors. So when I first put it down, you can kind of see the texture of the paper. And the more that it sits, the more that the heavy pigments are going to settle down into those little valleys in the paper. and then the top peaks are going to get paler. Whereas if I paint over here, you can see how it's a little more streaky. It's lighter. It just doesn't hold that paint, and those little particles don't quite know where to go as well. There's no real pattern popping up, at least not compared to this. So what are the advantages of hot press? If I want to get into kind of a drawing sort of a style, if I want lots of detail, if I don't want a sort of unexpected skid marks. See how this just wants to do a skid mark so bad. I can't do that detail nearly as well. I can do it, but it doesn't lend itself as well. I mean, I can get really light and thin and gestural over here on the right, whereas here, it's just a little trickier. If I want to color in a shape and have a really smooth line, you know, I mean, it relies on brush control, but the paint goes exactly where I put it. There's no texture to break up the edges of this shape. Whereas over here, you can see how the outline of this shape just isn't as clean. It's like painting on gravel. So you have less control over the finished shape. So there's the pros and the cons. There's no right or wrong answer. If you're more painterly, if you love wet and to wet, if you love rich, deep color, if you're not as attached to sharp, detailed edges and lines, this is a good choice. This is where I tend to hang out most of the time. But sometimes I get frustrated. I want a really detailed drawing. I want things to really be sharp and clear. I want brush control. That's when I hang out in the hot department. I hope this is helpful, and you can make better choices about what type of paper you want to use in the future. Okay, bye-bye.